I never thought I'd find myself writing a confession of the darkest corners of my soul. Yet here I am, piecing together the night that shattered the remnants of what I once called love. It all started with a careless, venomous act, a deliberate provocation by the one person who knew how to rile me up like no other, my wife, Vanessa. I remember the night vividly. It was as if every moment had been orchestrated to drive a wedge deep between us. She had decided to spend the night at her ex's party, a move so brazen and spiteful it could only be described as a calculated slap in my face. From the start, I sensed there was more to her actions than mere pettiness. Vanessa had always prided herself on her charm and her ability to manipulate any situation, and that night, her attitude reeked of entitlement. I'd been out of the house early, leaving her with nothing but a hollow silence, and when I returned, I found the traces of her nocturnal escapade, an overabundance of perfume, the faint echo of laughter not meant for our home, and a smug text message she left on my voicemail. That message, dripping with disdain, was the spark that lit the fuse of my resolve. I locked the door behind me as I stepped into my study, the walls lined with memories of better times now overshadowed by betrayal. In that solitary space, I let the weight of my thoughts settle. I recalled every whispered promise, every tender moment we once shared, now twisted into a bitter reminder of her duplicity. Vanessa wasn't just indulging in an ex's party. She was flaunting her disloyalty, a calculated effort to wound me deeply. I had always been confident, calm, and collected, but this betrayal ignited a cold fury within me that I had long kept at bay. My mind raced with the plans of retribution, each thought more meticulous than the last. I knew she had a reputation for being a shameless liar, a bitch who would never own up to her sins. Over the years, I'd seen her spin tales to cover her tracks, a master of deceit who hid her adulterous escapades behind a veneer of innocence. Tonight, however, the game was different. I was no longer the unsuspecting husband. I was the predator, and she was the prey who had unknowingly stepped into my trap. The first twist came unexpectedly. While piecing together evidence of her betrayal, I uncovered details that painted a picture far more complex than a mere fling at an ex's party. It seemed that Vanessa had been entangled in a web of deceit spanning months, if not years, carefully orchestrated lies that involved secret meetings, clandestine phone calls, and the occasional hushed whisper over dinner dates with other men. I began to realize that her party escapade was merely the tip of a treacherous iceberg. The shock of this discovery was only tempered by the grim satisfaction of knowing that she had underestimated me all along. That night, instead of confronting her in a rage, I allowed myself to relish in the irony of her arrogance. I remembered how she had sneered when I once gently inquired about her whereabouts, dismissing my concern with a laugh and a flick of her hand. Now, every dismissive word and every half-truth she'd ever uttered echoed in my mind, fueling my resolve. I decided then that my revenge would not be a spur-of-the-moment outburst. It would be calculated, methodical, and, yes, executed in cold blood. I began my plans by ensuring that no stone was left unturned. Every detail of her recent rendezvous was meticulously documented, the location of the party, the names of her supposed friends, and even the subtle hints that suggested she had been more than a casual participant in this sordid affair. I knew she would never admit the truth willingly. Vanessa was, after all, a consummate liar. Her confession would come only when she realized that her lies had left her defenseless against the consequences. And oh, how I intended to let her know the full extent of her betrayal. As the hours crept by, I meticulously prepared a dossier of evidence. With each new revelation, a quiet confidence grew within me, a conviction that my calculated revenge was inevitable. I wasn't acting out of blind rage, but out of a desire for justice, a desire to reclaim the dignity that had been trampled by her duplicity. Little did she know, every secret rendezvous and every whispered lie was already part of a much larger, more sinister design. My plan was set to unfold with a precision that would leave her no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. In the stillness of that night, I vowed that I would expose every lie, every betrayal, and every moment of her infidelity. The truth, once revealed, would shatter the facade she had so carefully constructed. And as I sat alone in my study, a quiet storm of resolve and cold determination building inside me, I knew that the true reckoning was yet to come. The path I had chosen was dark, and there was no turning back. For Vanessa, the ultimate betrayal had just begun, and I was poised to exact a revenge that would forever haunt her, a revenge as cold and unforgiving as the night itself. The following morning broke with a deceptive calm, a quiet prelude to the storm I had meticulously set in motion. I awoke with a clarity that bordered on obsession, every detail of the previous night replayed in my mind like a well-rehearsed script. I knew that Vanessa would soon awaken to the consequences of her reckless defiance, and I had already begun to tighten the noose around her carefully constructed web of lies. I started by securing all the evidence I had gathered, the discreet recordings of our late-night conversations, the text messages that reeked of insincerity, and even the photos I had surreptitiously taken of her at the party. Each piece was a testament to her deception, a fragment of a puzzle that painted a damning portrait of betrayal. Yet, as I reviewed the evidence, a nagging thought crept in. This wasn't merely about exposing her infidelity, it was about dismantling the very foundations of her treacherous lifestyle. That day, I visited our favorite cafe, a place that had once been a sanctuary of shared dreams and whispered promises. Now, it was a battleground where I plotted the next phase of my retribution. Over a cup of bitter coffee, I silently observed the regulars and noted every detail of the daily rhythm. I knew that Vanessa was a creature of habit, one who thrived on the predictability of her lies and the comfort of routine. And it was precisely that predictability I intended to exploit. My phone buzzed with an anonymous tip, a digital breadcrumb left by an old acquaintance who had once worked alongside Vanessa in a covert operation of her own making. This tip, wrapped in layers of cryptic hints, suggested that Vanessa was entangled in a far more dangerous game than a mere dalliance with an ex-lover. Rumors of blackmail, whispered negotiations, and dangerous liaisons with powerful figures began to surface. The woman I once adored, now reduced to a schemer dancing on the edge of ruin, had inadvertently involved herself in a labyrinth of criminality. Armed with this new revelation, I delved deeper into the underbelly of her double life. Every whispered conversation, every furtive glance, every coded message exchanged in dark corners became a thread I could tug on. I reached out to contacts I had long neglected, old friends from the days before our love turned toxic, and pieced together fragments of a narrative that was far more sinister than I had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of a lover's betrayal. It was a conspiracy that had the potential to bring down more than just a marriage. The twist that shook me to the core was the realization that Vanessa's indiscretions were being orchestrated by someone else, a mysterious puppeteer who pulled the strings from the shadows. This revelation turned my personal vendetta into a matter of public accountability. It was no longer solely about the betrayal I felt. It was about stopping a network of deceit that threatened to contaminate the lives of unsuspecting people. The irony was not lost on me. While she had thought to humiliate me and assert control over our shared narrative, she had inadvertently become a pawn in a larger, more dangerous game. I began laying out the next steps with clinical precision. First, I decided to confront her in a setting where I could maintain complete control, a confrontation that would not only strip her of her facade but also force the mysterious orchestrator's hand into the light. I arranged for a private meeting under the guise of reconciliation, knowing full well that she would see it as an opportunity to further manipulate the situation in her favor. I anticipated her response with a mix of disdain and confidence, fully expecting her to dismiss my concerns with the same arrogance that had fueled her previous transgressions. That afternoon, as the gray light of early autumn filtered through the city streets, Vanessa arrived at our designated meeting spot, a secluded corner of a downtown art gallery known for its clandestine gatherings and whispered secrets. Her entrance was as dramatic as ever. Clad in a designer dress and oozing an air of unrepentant superiority, she radiated an aura of invincibility. But I was no longer the naive husband who could be swayed by charm. I was a man armed with undeniable truth and a resolve forged in the fires of betrayal. Our conversation began with the usual veneer of civility, but as the minutes ticked by, the tension escalated. I laid out the evidence before her in calm, deliberate tones, watching her face as the dam of her lies began to crumble. Yet, true to form, Vanessa countered with a torrent of insults and dismissals, her voice laced with the venom of a woman who had long abandoned any pretense of remorse. "You think you can humiliate me with your pathetic moral high ground?" she spat, her words as sharp as broken glass. "I'm not the one hiding behind the walls of our home while you brood in your little study." Her defiance only stoked the fire within me. I pressed on, revealing the hints of the larger conspiracy, her ties to dangerous individuals, and the cryptic messages that hinted at coercion. The more I spoke, the more I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly masked by a veneer of arrogance. But the mask was cracking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the full weight of her guilt would crush her defiant spirit. At that moment, the gallery's ambient lights dimmed as an announcement echoed through the space. The room fell into a hushed silence, and in that brief lapse of normalcy, I saw an opportunity. I had arranged for one of my trusted contacts to discreetly record the entire exchange, a recording that would serve as the final nail in the coffin of her deceit. As I excused myself under the pretext of taking in the art, I watched her retreat into a corner, her posture slumped and her eyes darting nervously, as if she were expecting a hidden enemy to emerge from the shadows. The game had shifted dramatically. The stakes were now much higher than a petty marital dispute. I had unwittingly entangled Vanessa in a web that spanned far beyond our crumbling union. The orchestrator behind her misdeeds was still at large, and I resolved that both would pay for the havoc they had wrought. With each passing moment, my confidence solidified, a cold, unwavering determination to see justice served, even if it meant crossing moral lines I once held sacred. As I stepped back into the gallery's main hall, I felt the weight of what was to come settle upon me like an iron shroud. The confrontation was just the beginning. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. Yet, I could not turn back now. The man I once was had been shattered by betrayal, and from its ruins, a new resolve had emerged. A resolve to exact revenge with precision and unyielding coldness. Vanessa had underestimated me once, and she would do so again, paying dearly for every lie and every betrayal with a price measured in shattered trust and broken lives. That evening, as dusk surrendered to a chill, unyielding night, I returned to my sanctum, a place where every shadow seemed to echo secrets and every memory bore the weight of betrayal. The confrontation at the gallery had left me with more questions than answers, but I was determined to unearth every hidden truth. I knew that Vanessa's carefully constructed facade was riddled with cracks, and it was in those fissures that I intended to drive my final blades. Once home, I secured my study, sealing away the tangible evidence of our crumbling past. I then began the next phase of my plan, a meticulous deep dive into the underworld Vanessa had so recklessly strayed into. The recording from the gallery meeting, now safely stored on a discreet, encrypted drive, was my first weapon. But I needed more. I required incontrovertible proof that her treachery was intertwined with darker, more sinister alliances. I spent hours piecing together the scattered remnants of our shared life, revisiting old bank statements, cross-referencing phone logs, and even sifting through encrypted emails that hinted at shadowy figures demanding favors in exchange for silence. With each new discovery, my resolve grew stronger. I recalled an old confidant, a man whose expertise in digital forensics was matched only by his discretion. Reaching out to him was risky, but I had nothing left to lose. In hushed tones over a secure line, I detailed Vanessa's labyrinthine entanglements, her clandestine meetings, suspicious transactions, and her links to a powerful, enigmatic figure who seemed to orchestrate the chaos from behind the scenes. The deeper I delved, the more it became apparent that Vanessa had not been acting on mere impulse. Her nocturnal escapades were carefully choreographed performances, rehearsed to perfection, designed to manipulate not only me, but a network of influential, albeit dangerous, individuals. It was a revelation that unsettled even my steely resolve. The web of deceit had grown far beyond our shattered marriage, and now the stakes were perilously high. In one particularly damning incident, I discovered evidence that Vanessa had met with a notorious fixer known only by his pseudonym, the Architect. The meeting, held at a derelict warehouse on the outskirts of the city, had been recorded by a hidden camera I'd installed weeks earlier after suspecting her duplicity. In those grainy images, she was seen exchanging a sealed envelope with a man whose cold, calculating gaze mirrored her own. The contents of that envelope, as I would later deduce, held the key to an unfolding conspiracy, one that implicated not just Vanessa, but a cabal of influential figures who thrived on the misery of unsuspecting victims. Armed with this explosive new evidence, I plotted my next move with clinical precision. I decided that the next confrontation must occur on her terms, a trap that would force her to reveal every vile secret she'd so desperately tried to hide. I arranged a private dinner at an upscale restaurant, a place where her vanity would compel her to appear impeccably poised, unaware that every move, every subtle glance, was being observed by agents of my own making. I invited her under the guise of reconciliation, knowing that her overconfidence and hubris would ensure her attendance. At dinner, every gesture was measured, every word a calculated salvo. I began casually, recounting memories that once bound us together, moments now tarnished by her incessant lies. But as the meal progressed, the conversation took a darker turn. I laid out the evidence, piece by piece, from the damning recordings to the cryptic emails implicating the architect. I watched her eyes narrow, her perfectly curated composure beginning to crumble under the weight of incontrovertible proof. Her initial reaction was one of haughty dismissal, a derisive laugh that echoed with the arrogance of a woman who believed herself untouchable. "You really think you can bring me down with your petty sleuthing?" she sneered, her tone laced with condescension. Yet beneath that veneer, I sensed the faint tremor of fear. In a desperate bid to reclaim control, she tried to divert the conversation, tossing out half-truths and biting remarks that did little to mask her inner turmoil. But the true twist was yet to come. Midway through the dessert course, as the clinking of silverware melded with the soft murmur of the restaurant, a third party arrived, an unanticipated figure whose presence sent a ripple of shock through the room. It was none other than one of Vanessa's long-forgotten associates, a man known for his ruthlessness and cunning. He strode into our midst without a word, his eyes locking onto Vanessa with a mixture of disdain and grudging respect. His arrival, orchestrated by my unseen contacts, was the final piece of the puzzle, a living embodiment of the collateral damage caused by her duplicity. For a brief, tense moment, the air was thick with unspoken accusations. Vanessa's face drained of color as she recognized the man. Her carefully constructed poise evaporated, leaving behind only raw panic. I realized then that she was not only ensnared in a web of lies, but also entangled with forces that could obliterate her life with a single, well-aimed blow. This man, whose identity remained shrouded in a cloak of danger, was the very person I intended to use to seal her fate. As the evening drew to a close, I excused myself, leaving behind a tableau of chaos and despair. I knew that I had forced her hand. She was on the precipice, teetering between denial and confession. In the silence of that final moment, as I stepped out into the cool night, I felt a grim satisfaction. The pieces were in place, the dominoes set to fall. Vanessa's carefully constructed world was about to collapse, and with it, the lies that had poisoned our union. Walking away, I knew that my quest for justice and revenge was far from over. Each step I took was a silent promise to see her pay for every deceitful act, every whispered lie, and every betrayal. The journey ahead was dark and perilous, but I had never been more certain of my purpose. Vanessa had sown the seeds of her own downfall, and now, as the night swallowed me whole, I prepared to unleash a reckoning that would be as inevitable as it was merciless. The days that followed that fateful dinner were shrouded in an eerie calm, a deceptive lull that masked the mounting tension in my every step. I spent hours in solitude, poring over the evidence I had collected, each new detail reinforcing the inevitability of Vanessa's downfall. In the quiet moments of reflection, I meticulously crafted the next phase of my plan, a plan that would not merely expose her treachery, but dismantle the entire web of deceit that had ensnared her life. I began by infiltrating the very circles Vanessa had so carelessly mingled with. I contacted a few more trusted allies, individuals who had long been on the fringes of her world, and slowly, piece by piece, I gathered testimonies that painted an even darker picture of her associations. These were not just fleeting encounters at trendy soirees. These were deliberate, well-orchestrated meetings with individuals of questionable repute. Each conversation, each recorded whisper of conspiracy, fanned the flames of my resolve. The realization was inescapable. Vanessa had become a linchpin in a scheme far more sinister than I had ever imagined. Late one night, while scanning through encrypted messages on a secure server I'd set up, I stumbled upon a string of communications that chilled me to the bone. The messages, hidden beneath layers of digital camouflage, were between Vanessa and someone she referred to only as the broker. Their words were laden with hints of financial transfers, illicit favors, and even more dangerous liaisons. The broker, it turned out, was not a minor player but a key facilitator in a network that trafficked secrets, leveraging personal scandals to manipulate high-stakes deals. Vanessa, in her unbridled arrogance, had positioned herself as an indispensable asset in this corrupt enterprise. I decided it was time to act. With the weight of irrefutable evidence at my back, I set a trap designed to corner her in the most humiliating way imaginable. I arranged for a private meeting at a secluded mansion, a location known among the elite as a retreat for confidential negotiations. The invitation was sent with a veneer of reconciliation, but beneath it lay a promise of an irrevocable reckoning. I knew that Vanessa's vanity and hubris would compel her to attend. After all, nothing stung like being recognized in the circles she so desperately coveted. The night of the meeting, I arrived early. The mansion exuded an aura of understated opulence, a fitting stage for the drama that was about to unfold. I watched the grand entrance as guests in elegant attire mingled under soft, ambient lighting. Amid the refined chatter, I sought Vanessa, certain that her arrival would be marked by the same theatrical flair that had defined her life. When she finally appeared, a vision of calculated perfection, every inch the seductress, I couldn't help but note the flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. It was as if she sensed that tonight, the carefully curated mask of her duplicity might finally slip. I greeted her with a courteous smile, but inside, a cold determination roiled. I led her to a private lounge, where a select group of individuals awaited, each one an integral part of the intricate tapestry I had woven over the past few days. Among them was a man with a reputation as a fixer, his presence a silent threat to anyone who thought they could escape the consequences of their actions. As we settled into the plush seating, I began my unhurried monologue, recounting the timeline of her betrayals with a precision that left no room for ambiguity. "Vanessa," I said, my voice measured and unwavering, "tonight, you are not merely confronting the ghosts of our past. You are facing every lie, every calculated act of betrayal that has defined your recent years." I laid out the damning evidence, screenshots of encrypted communications, recordings of secretive conversations, and even images capturing her clandestine meetings. With every revelation, the room's atmosphere grew thicker with the weight of impending doom. Vanessa's reaction was immediate and visceral. She attempted to laugh off my claims with a scoff that bordered on hysteria, her words dripping with the arrogance of a woman who believed she could twist any narrative in her favor. "You think you can break me with your little parlor tricks?" she retorted, her tone challenging yet betraying a hint of desperation. But the presence of the assembled witnesses, each silently affirming the irrefutable truth, left her cornered. Then came the twist, a moment that shattered the facade entirely. One of the witnesses, a respected figure in our mutual circles and someone Vanessa had always believed to be on her side, stepped forward. In a calm, measured tone, he revealed that he had been monitoring her communications for months. His confession was not born of malice, but of a sense of duty to expose corruption and deceit. "I have known Vanessa for years," he declared, his voice steady, "and I can attest to the fact that her involvement with the broker is just the tip of an iceberg. She has betrayed not only you but everyone who trusted her." The room erupted in a hushed murmur as Vanessa's eyes widened in shock and disbelief. For the first time, she was forced to confront the magnitude of her own actions, a betrayal that extended far beyond a failed marriage. In that charged silence, I saw her veneer begin to crack. Yet, even as the evidence mounted, she clung to a final, desperate lie, a feeble attempt to reclaim control. I never meant for any of this to happen," she stammered, her voice barely audible. But her words were met with icy stares and the collective disapproval of those who had gathered to witness her downfall. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "Your intentions are irrelevant, Vanessa," I said coldly. "What matters is the chain of events you set in motion, the lies, the deceit, and the irreversible damage you have caused." In that moment, the mansion became a crucible of truth, a place where every pretense was stripped away to reveal the raw, unvarnished reality. With the revelation complete, the first act of my revenge was set into motion. Vanessa was left isolated, her network of enablers crumbling around her as each individual faced their own moral reckoning. And as I stepped back into the shadows of that grand hall, I knew that this was only the beginning. The path of retribution was long and fraught with peril, but every step taken was a step toward a final, irreversible justice. A justice that would leave no room for the lies that had so defined her existence. In the aftermath of that fateful night at the mansion, the world as I once knew it was irrevocably transformed. Vanessa's empire of lies had begun to crumble, and with it, the last vestiges of our shared history. Yet even as her allies turned their backs on her, I knew the final act of this twisted drama was still unfolding, a relentless, unyielding pursuit of a justice that had been denied for far too long. The revelation at the mansion had been more than a personal triumph. It was a declaration that no one was above the consequences of their actions. But as the whispers of her betrayal echoed through our once exclusive circles, I learned that Vanessa had one more card to play. A desperate maneuver that threatened to upend everything I had worked so meticulously to achieve. Late one night, while reviewing the mountain of evidence and intercepted communications, I stumbled upon a message that sent a chill down my spine. It was from the broker, written in a terse, unyielding tone, warning me that Vanessa's defiance had not gone unnoticed. The message hinted at a final confrontation, one where the stakes would extend far beyond our ruined marriage and touch the very core of an underworld I had only just begun to understand. Determined to preempt any further treachery, I embarked on a daring mission to intercept the broker's network. In the labyrinthine corridors of the city's digital realm, I became both hunter and prey, an invisible specter moving among streams of encrypted data and coded secrets. Every intercepted message, every hacked server, and every clandestine meeting with an anonymous contact served as a stepping stone toward dismantling the shadowy empire that had been nurturing Vanessa's deceit. The further I delved, the more I realized that she was not an isolated aberration. She was a vital cog in a much larger, corrupt machine. This discovery only deepened my resolve. It was no longer enough to expose her for personal vendetta. I had to unravel the entire tapestry of corruption and hold every participant accountable. Amidst this digital cat-and-mouse game, I discovered that Vanessa had been orchestrating more than just secret affairs. She had, in fact, been funneling substantial sums of money to fund dubious ventures and safeguard illicit deals. A series of bank transfers, each meticulously camouflaged as routine expenses, revealed a flow of funds that could destabilize influential figures if brought to light. The scale of her deception astounded me, and I began to see the inevitable collision course between her duplicity and the ruthless world of financial retribution. While I wrestled with this expanding conspiracy, a new twist emerged. A chance encounter with an old friend, a former confidant who had once been intimately involved in Vanessa's schemes, uncovered a secret that shattered even my hardened exterior. This friend, whose conscience had long been tormented by guilt, confessed that Vanessa had not acted alone. In hushed, trembling tones, he revealed that she had been the mastermind behind a series of fraudulent deals designed to swindle not only our circle, but also unwitting investors from far beyond our immediate sphere. The betrayal cut deeper than any personal slight. It was a systematic abuse of trust, orchestrated by a woman who had always prided herself on her cunning. Emboldened by this damning testimony, I set my sights on a final, decisive act of retribution, a move that would bring her schemes crashing down in a spectacular cascade of ruin. I arranged a secret meeting with the most powerful players within the broker's network, those who had long been the silent benefactors of Vanessa's lies. In a derelict warehouse repurposed as a clandestine meeting ground, I confronted them with the full extent of my findings. My voice, cold and unwavering, recounted every sordid detail, the hidden bank transfers, the manipulated transactions, and the false promises that had lured so many into her trap. Their stunned silence was a tacit acknowledgement that the balance of power had irreversibly shifted. Yet, as I orchestrated this coup against her criminal accomplices, Vanessa made one final, desperate attempt to salvage what remained of her fractured world. A cryptic message arrived on my secure line, a summons to a private rendezvous, laced with threats and promises of absolution if only I would step aside. For a moment, I hesitated, contemplating the possibility of parley. But then I remembered the countless nights of solitude, the cold calculations, and the ever-growing pile of evidence that testified to her relentless betrayal. There was no room for negotiation in this final act. There was only the stark clarity of retribution. I agreed to the meeting, choosing a remote location far from prying eyes, a secluded estate on the outskirts of the city, where every whisper of the wind seemed to echo the grim inevitability of fate. As I drove there under a sky streaked with the fading light of dusk, a sense of finality gripped me. This was it, the culmination of every calculated risk, every sacrifice, and every moment of simmering anger. Vanessa's last stand was imminent, and with it, the promise of a reckoning that would leave nothing unscathed. Inside the estate, The atmosphere was heavy with foreboding. I could almost sense the weight of the inevitable confrontation as I approached the dimly lit foyer. In that silent moment, every memory of our shared past flashed before my eyes. Each joyous moment, every whispered promise, all now tainted by the acrid bitterness of deceit. I steeled myself for what was to come, knowing that the choices I made in the coming hours would seal our fates. Vanessa had played her final hand, and now, the game would end with a cold, uncompromising act of vengeance. The estate's walls seemed to pulse with a sinister anticipation as I navigated its labyrinthine corridors, every step drawing me closer to the final confrontation. I had arrived on a night when the moon hid behind shrouds of cloud, lending an otherworldly quality to the atmosphere, a fitting backdrop for the darkness that had long festered in my soul. The drive here had been solitary, punctuated only by the hum of my engine and the distant rustling of leaves, each sound a reminder that there was no turning back from the path I had chosen. Inside the estate, I moved silently, my eyes fixed on the shadows that danced along the ancient walls. Every corner, every door, seemed to hold a secret, a promise of revelations that might tip the scales in this final act of retribution. The invitation to this meeting had been vague, a last-minute summons cloaked in urgency, and the threat of dire consequences. I knew Vanessa was there, waiting in a room that promised both confrontation and, perhaps, a chance for her to salvage some semblance of control. But I was no longer the man she once knew, the husband who had once believed in redemption. I was a man reborn from betrayal, driven by an insatiable need for justice. After what felt like an eternity of careful pacing, I found myself standing before a heavy, ornately carved door. My pulse was steady, my resolve unyielding. I knocked only once, a measured, deliberate tap, and the silence that followed was broken by the soft, almost imperceptible click of the door opening. Vanessa stood there, framed by the dim light from the room beyond. For a moment, time slowed. Her eyes, wide and laced with a mixture of defiance and dread, met mine. The woman who had once ruled our lives with manipulative grace now looked diminished, her bravado evaporating in the face of inevitable retribution. "Come in," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly, betraying the calm facade she had so long maintained. I stepped past her into the room, a spacious parlor adorned with antique furnishings and heavy drapes that seemed to muffle the outside world. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and I could almost hear the echo of every lie that had led us to this precipice. I closed the door behind me, sealing us in a chamber where the past and the present collided. The room was prepared not as a sanctuary, but as an arena, a place where every whispered secret would be laid bare and every deceit would be met with cold, calculated justice. I motioned for her to sit, though I knew there was no escaping the gravity of the moment. Vanessa hesitated only a moment before lowering herself onto a vintage chaise, her eyes never leaving mine. "Vanessa," I began, my tone low and unwavering. "Tonight is not about negotiations or empty promises. Tonight is about facing the truth." I laid a thick folder on a nearby table, the culmination of months of surveillance, stolen conversations, and digital footprints painstakingly assembled. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of her charade, a testament to a life built on betrayal and lies. She looked at the folder, her eyes flickering over its contents, screenshots of secret meetings, transcriptions of hushed phone calls, and documents that implicated her in schemes far beyond our marital discord. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said, her voice a mix of desperation and defiance. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. You don't understand the forces at work." I leaned forward, letting the silence stretch between us for a heartbeat too long. "On the contrary, I understand perfectly," I replied. "I understand that you built your life on manipulation and deceit, and I understand that you thought you could hide behind your lies. But tonight, every secret you buried, every betrayal you committed, is coming to light." My words were precise, each one a calculated blow meant to shatter the last remnants of her false composure. Just then, the lights flickered and the room plunged into a brief, unnerving darkness. In that moment, a series of prearranged signals went off, a silent alarm to my hidden accomplices, ensuring that no escape route would be available for her if she attempted to run. The sudden interruption was more than a technical glitch. It was the final seal on her fate. When the lights returned, a new figure stood in the doorway. It was the fixer, the man whose mere presence had already sent shockwaves through our previous encounters. His eyes were cold, and his expression unreadable as he silently joined the tense tableau. "You're not going anywhere, Vanessa," I said, my voice devoid of any lingering warmth. "Every step you took on this path has led to this moment. And now, it's time to pay for your crimes." The fixer's silent nod was all the confirmation I needed. He was ready to enforce the final act of my meticulously crafted plan. Vanessa's response was a desperate attempt at defiance, a feeble retort meant to reclaim some semblance of power. "You think this will fix everything? You think exposing me will undo the damage?" Her words faltered as she realized that there was no escape from the repercussions of her actions. I stepped closer, my eyes locked onto hers with a cold intensity. "No, Vanessa, nothing will fix what you've done. But tonight, you'll know what it means to live with the consequences." In that charged moment, the room became a crucible of retribution. Every whispered secret, every stolen moment of our shattered past, converged into an inescapable reckoning. My hand, steady and resolute, rested on the folder, an emblem of the damning proof that would soon be unleashed. The air was thick with the scent of impending doom, and as the fixer moved to secure the exits, I knew that the final chapter of our tragic story was about to be written. Vanessa's eyes, now filled with a raw, unfiltered terror, met mine one last time. In that silent exchange, there was no forgiveness, no reconciliation, only the cold, unyielding promise of revenge. The charged atmosphere in the room grew even more oppressive as the weight of inevitability pressed down on us. With Vanessa ensnared by my carefully constructed trap, every second seemed to stretch into an eternity of looming retribution. The fixer's silent presence by the doorway and the locked exit served as grim reminders that escape was no longer an option for her. I could see the panic flickering behind her eyes, an emotion that was all too human, yet utterly foreign in the cold calculation of my heart. I began by methodically laying out the final phase of my plan. "Vanessa," I said in a tone that brooked no argument, "tonight, you will not only face the consequences of your betrayals but also witness how deeply your lies have contaminated the lives of others." My words were measured, each syllable a precise strike aimed at dismantling the last vestiges of her arrogant facade. I pulled a sealed envelope from my jacket, a final piece of evidence that even she had not anticipated would come to light. Inside that envelope was a dossier detailing her darkest secrets, a series of transactions that funneled money into offshore accounts, compromising correspondences that hinted at collusion with high-profile figures, and even records of bribes and backdoor deals that she had thought would remain forever hidden. This was no longer about our failed marriage. It was about the systematic destruction of trust and the betrayal of those who had believed in her. As I slid the envelope across the table toward her, I watched as her composure crumbled further. "You knew exactly what you were doing when you used every lie to manipulate everyone around you," I continued, my voice unwavering in its icy resolve. "But now, the people you deceived, the partners you swindled, they all deserve to know the truth. And tonight, you will see how their lives are about to be irrevocably altered." At that moment, an unexpected twist shattered the already precarious balance. The heavy oak door creaked open once more, and another figure stepped into the parlor, a woman whose presence sent a jolt of recognition through me. It was Lydia, Vanessa's estranged sister, whose life she had long manipulated and abandoned. Lydia, with sorrow etched on her face and a determined glint in her eyes, carried a personal vendetta that she had nurtured in silence for years. Without a word, she approached and placed a thick folder on the table next to mine. "Vanessa," Lydia said, her voice low but filled with an emotion I could almost call righteousness. "You have tormented not only me, but everyone who ever trusted you. Today, I join him in demanding accountability." Her unexpected arrival and alliance with me added an unforeseen dimension to the night, a reckoning that was no longer solely my burden to bear. This was a collective punishment for a lifetime of deceit. Vanessa's eyes darted between us, her earlier defiance now replaced by a mounting terror. You don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling as the realization set in that her carefully constructed empire of lies was collapsing from every side. "I did what I had to do." "Save your excuses," I interjected sharply. "Your choices were made in cold blood, without regard for the collateral damage. Tonight, we expose every secret you've hidden, and every life you've ruined will come to know your treachery." I reached for the dossier and began recounting each sordid detail aloud. the transactions, the blackmail schemes, the way she had manipulated those who trusted her. With every piece of evidence I revealed, the room filled with an almost tangible dread. The fixer moved in subtly, ensuring that no unexpected help could intervene. Meanwhile, Lydia's presence lent an added gravity to the proceedings, her own quiet testimony interlaced with mine as she recounted years of suffering at Vanessa's hands. The sisterly betrayal cut deep. Vanessa, known for her manipulative charm, had always believed she could control every narrative. But now, the voices of those she had hurt rose in unison against her. As the damning details continued to unfold, Vanessa's protests grew increasingly desperate. Her voice cracked as she tried to justify her actions, to twist the narrative once more. But the evidence was overwhelming, a relentless torrent of indisputable facts. In a moment of raw panic, she broke down. I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she sobbed, her words trailing off into the silence that followed. It was the closest she came to admitting guilt, and it only served to confirm that her entire existence had been a fabrication of lies, with not a shred of genuine remorse. The room fell silent as I delivered the final, irrevocable verdict. "Your intentions mean nothing now, Vanessa. The damage is done, and every person you've manipulated will now have a voice." I paused, letting the full weight of my words sink in. "Tonight, we begin the process of dismantling your network, exposing the full extent of your corruption to those who have been kept in the dark. There is no redemption for you, only the consequence of your actions." In that moment, as I watched Vanessa's eyes fill with a mixture of regret, fear, and bitter realization, I felt a profound sense of closure. The night had taken on a life of its own, a dark symphony of retribution and reckoning. While my heart was hardened by betrayal, there was also a grim satisfaction in knowing that justice, however cold and unyielding, had been served. And as the final whispers of her contrition faded into the oppressive silence of that once grand parlor, I knew that the real punishment had only just begun. The journey toward exposing the full breadth of her treachery was far from over. With Lydia at my side and the weight of our shared truths bearing down on her, Vanessa was left with nothing but the stark reality of her own making, a reality that would haunt her for the rest of her days. The weight of that fateful night still clung to the cold air as I left the parlor, every step echoing with the finality of our confrontation. Vanessa's broken figure, crumpled on the vintage chaise, remained in my thoughts as I retreated into the quiet corridors of the estate. The gravity of her exposed secrets rippled far beyond that room. Its shockwaves had already begun to unsettle the very foundation of the illicit network she had so carefully cultivated. After ensuring that every door was secured and that no ally of hers could intervene, I retreated to a secluded study within the estate. There, in the dim glow of a single lamp, I meticulously reviewed every scrap of evidence that had been gathered over the past months. Every screenshot, every recorded conversation, and every intercepted message was a testament to her ruthless ambition. But even as I marveled at the precision of her downfall, a disquieting thought nagged at me. The network behind her was vast, and the true architect of this labyrinth of corruption had yet to be unmasked. Determined to root out the source of this malevolence, I initiated a series of calls to my most trusted informants, those who had once navigated the treacherous corridors of high finance and covert operations. Their voices, laden with equal parts caution and urgency, confirmed what I had long suspected. The broker, that shadowy figure whose whispered influence had propelled Vanessa into her position of power, was not only still at large, but was also actively orchestrating a series of deals that threatened to destabilize even larger circles of influence. One voice, raspy yet resolute, told me that the broker was planning a high-stakes meeting at a secure location, a gathering of the most notorious figures in the underworld. This was no ordinary assembly, but a conclave that could redraw power dynamics in ways that none of us could have predicted. The revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. Vanessa's betrayal was merely a symptom of a much larger, more insidious cancer. And while her network was now in shambles, the broker's shadow still loomed ominously over the scene. The decision was swift and unyielding. I could not let the opportunity slip by. I had to attend this meeting and expose the broker's role, ensuring that his influence was permanently curtailed. It was a gamble that bordered on the suicidal, Yet every fiber of my being resonated with the certainty that this was the only way to secure true justice. I dispatched a trusted associate to gather more details about the meeting's time and location, while I prepared to move in under the cover of darkness. As night deepened, the estate itself transformed into a staging ground for the final act of this intricate play. Lydia, whose alliance had been a sudden, cathartic twist in our unfolding drama, joined me in the study. Her eyes, still glistening with unshed tears of betrayal and vengeance, met mine as she whispered, "We can't let him slip away this time. He's the one who made you, who made us all pay for her sins." Her words carried the weight of shared grief and determination, and in that moment, our alliance was sealed by a mutual understanding of the stakes involved. Together, we traced the digital breadcrumbs left behind by the broker's associates. The trail was cryptic, a maze of encrypted emails and coded references, but my resolve sharpened with every passing minute. I realized that this meeting was scheduled for dawn, a symbolic moment when darkness gives way to light, yet in our world, it would instead herald the exposure of even deeper shadows. With Lydia's help, I hacked into the communication network of one of his lieutenants. The details were scarce, but they were enough to map out the rendezvous, an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city, a location chosen for its isolation and its labyrinthine structure that would favor secrecy. Before setting out, I took a final moment in the study to gather my thoughts. The evidence of Vanessa's deceit lay scattered like fallen leaves in my dossier, each piece a reminder of the betrayal that had reshaped my existence. But now, the focus had shifted from one woman's treachery to a systemic corruption that threatened to poison the lives of many. Every decision I had made, every calculated step toward this moment, was driven by a singular goal: to dismantle the network of lies and deceit that had turned our lives into a battlefield. I left the estate quietly, the cool pre-dawn air enveloping me as I drove toward the industrial complex. The city was still asleep, unaware of the storm that was about to break over its underbelly. My mind raced with possibilities, each twist and turn of the impending confrontation as unpredictable as the labyrinthine paths that had led me here. In that moment, I was no longer simply a wronged husband seeking personal revenge. I was a force, a relentless embodiment of justice, poised to bring down a network that had thrived on the misery of countless unsuspecting lives. The final act was near. The brokers' meeting, a gathering of the vilest in our world, was about to begin. And as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, I steeled myself for what was to come. The truth, long suppressed and shrouded in layers of deceit, was ready to be unleashed upon those who thought themselves untouchable.